Okay, now I'm going to show you a security risk with these application settings, and then I will explain how to address this issue. But before we get into the details, I want to emphasize that this approach has complexities, and I would recommend to use it only if you're working on a project where security is a big concern. Otherwise, keep things simple. So what's wrong here? We are storing this Facebook app secret as plain text. Also, in the connection string section, we don't currently have a username and password, but in most real-world applications, you would most likely have a username and password here. When we check this code into our source control repository, these secrets are visible to anyone who has access to that repository. And this is especially a big concern if we are using a public repository like the ones on GitHub. So we need to exclude these secrets from source control. Instead, every developer will have them on their machine, and when a new developer joins the team, someone in the team will send him the secrets internally. Okay, now let me show you the steps. In Solution Explorer, we right-click the project and add a new item. In the templates under Web, we select Web Configuration File, give it a name, appsettings.config, and make sure to select config here. Don't use XML, because by default, IIS does not serve configuration files. Now we delete everything here, go back to web.config, select app settings, cut, and then paste it here. Save. Now back in web.config, we add app settings again, but this time we set the attribute config source. And here we specify the name of the external file, appsettings.config. Now from source control management perspective, we can exclude this file, appsettings.config, from source control. And this will prevent the issue I talked about. But once again, do this only if you're using a public repository. If you're using a repository internally and only a few people have read access to that repository, you don't really need to do this, unless you're working on a project where security is a big concern. And by the way, you can repeat the exact same steps with the connection strings. So you create a separate file, move all connection strings there, and then set config source here. Now, in terms of deployment, when we deploy our application using the publish wizard, these external config files will also be deployed with web.config. Now, there is another risk here. On the target web server, these configuration files include our secrets in plain text. So if a hacker gets access to this server, he or she can find all our secrets and get even more access. Potentially, they can get full access to the database and read a lot of private data or just execute a script to mess up with the data. To prevent this, we need to encrypt these files. Now, I'm going to show you a simplified version of this process so you see how everything works. But in reality, there is a bit more complication to this, and I will explain that later. So let me show you the workflow. Let's say we are ready to deploy our application. First, we go to Publish Wizard and deploy to the file system. So currently, you see I'm deploying to C drive in the deploy folder. Publish. Okay, beautiful. Now, before uploading these files to our web server, we need to encrypt our settings. So we search for Visual Studio Tools. Open this. Here we have developer command prompt, right click, and run as administrator. It's very important to run this as an administrator, otherwise it's not going to work. Here we're going to use one of the tools with .NET Framework, ASP.NET _reg-iis. We provide a switch -PEF, and this is for encrypting the settings. Now, we want to encrypt the app settings section in web.config. Now, in the real world, you would repeat the same step with connection strings as well. Next, we specify where our files are located. In C drive, in the deploy folder. So our web.config is here. And now for demonstration, I'm going to supply a provider. So prop switch, and I set this to data protection configuration provider. With this provider, only the machine that encrypts our web.config is the one that can decrypt it. This doesn't work in your workflow because you're going to encrypt this web.config on your build machine and then deploy it to a different machine. Then you would use a different provider called RSA. And for that to work, you need to create a digital certificate and share it between these machines. Then any machines with this certificate can decrypt this file. But again, that's really beyond the scope of this course. So basically with this command, we're telling the framework to encrypt the app settings section of web.config. Now, if the app settings section has the settings internally, they'll be encrypted there. Otherwise, if they're stored in an external file, that external file, in this case, app-settings.config, will be encrypted. Succeeded? Let me show you the output. So here's my deploy folder. I'm going to open up this app-settings.config. Look, this is the output. So if anyone gets access to this web server, they cannot extract our secrets here. Now, even though our app settings is encrypted, ASP.NET MVC runtime can decrypt it and extract the values. Now, let me show you how to decrypt this. So back here, I'm going to bring up the last command and remove the provider. And then change PEF to PDF, decryption. Succeeded. Back to Visual Studio. Yes. And here are our settings. So this was the workflow. You publish to the file system, then you use ASP.NET RegIIS to encrypt app settings and connection strings. But as you see, this is manual and time consuming. So in a real world project where you need that level of security, you need to implement build automation. So you would create a script using tools like PowerShell that publishes the project to the file system and then encrypts app settings and connection strings. All right, we're done here. In the next lecture, I'm going to talk about custom error pages.